Good morning, scholars. Today we're going to conclude Lesson 10 of Pharr's Homeric Greek, our treatment or introduction to the future and aorist verbs in omega. As Pharr says, the first aorist of vowel and mute verbs is regularly formed by adding sigma alpha, sometimes that sigma is doubled, to the augmented verb stem, followed by the personal endings of the secondary tenses. If the verb stem ends in a long vowel or a consonant, only one sigma is ever added. If it ends in a short vowel, either one or two sigmas may be used. So the personal endings that are added are displayed here: a, as, e, amen, ate, an. And so that results in the forms elusa, elusas, eluse, elusamen, elusate, elusan. Elusa, elusas, eluse, elusamen, elusate, elusan. So here we see side by side the future and the first aorist contrasted. You will see that both groups contain the central stem lambda, upsilon, sigma, but in the case of the future, you have added the personal endings of the present, o, es, a, omen, ete, use. And in the first aorist, you have the augment, first of all, but then you have the secondary endings with alpha prominent. Elusa, elusas, eluse, elusamen, elusate, elusan. So your tip-off that you're looking at a first aorist form will almost always be the presence of the sigma followed by an alpha. Okay. Now, but they're not only the first aorist, but they're also second aorists. And second aorists, as Pharr says, are formed in various ways. First off, a common method is for them to have the secondary endings followed by the thematic vowel omicron epsilon, thus being conjugated just like the perfect, but on a shortened stem. Number two, many have the secondary endings attached directly to the tense stem and thus are conjugated like the aorist passive, but without the theta of the passive stem. So later we will look very closely at these second aorists of bino, duo, and gignosco. So we won't worry about that right now. And then a third, others, end in alpha and are conjugated with the same endings as the first aorist, but without the sigma. So you have these forms that have a second aorist stem, but take the first aorist endings. And then fourthly, certain verbs in the second aorist are reduplicated, and we will deal with those when we get to those verbs. The examples given here are ago, to lead, and kairo, to rejoice. And we'll talk about reduplication and reduplicated forms later. So again, we have these mixed aorists. As Pharr puts it, a few aorists, sometimes called mixed aorists, are formed by adding sigma, epsilon, omicron, the thematic vowel, followed by the personal endings of the second endings to the augmented verb stem. Or as Smyth puts it, Homer has some forms of the first aorist with the thematic vowel omicron epsilon of the second aorist. And he gives you these examples. So take a look at 542d if you want to get to that. But just you have to be aware that this is some of the liberty that Homer can take. So there are also a special case of these aorists of the ω-Verbs, And these are very important verbs, and they are definitely a thorn in the side of any Greek student. So it's good to begin learning them with these aorist forms. You have hi'eme, to throw, didome, to give or grant, and titheme, to put or place. And these, in the aorist, show kappa alpha instead of sigma alpha in the singular. So you have heika, heikas, heike, edoka, edokas, edoke, and eteka, etekas, eteke. But in the dual and the plural, these second aorists show the weak grade of the vowel. So eta becomes epsilon iota, amen, eta, ason. In didome, we get edomen, edit, edote, edoson. And in titemi, we get etemen, etete, eteson. So this variation between the weak and strong form of the vowel is an important one to mark, as well as the introduction of kappa alpha instead of sigma alpha in these vowels. So you'll do yourself a favor if you commit these to memory right off the bat. So the formation of the future, on the other hand, the future stem is formed by adding the suffix sigma to the verb stem. Thus you get luso, lusomai, teso from titeme, and dekso from deknume, where the xi has been generated by the collision of kappa with sigma. And to these 10 stems, as I said, are added the same endings that adhere in the present. O, es, a, amen, ete, use. So you end up with this contrast between the future and the first aorist, where both columns have displayed the lambda, long, upsilon, sigma, but the future shows the personal endings of the present, whereas the first aorist shows first the augment, the epsilon, and then the endings of the secondary endings with the a being alpha being dominant. Elusa, elusas, eluse, elusamen, elusate, elusan, as opposed to luso, luces, luce, lusomen, lusate, lususe. So the endings of the second aorist are on, s, e, omen, ete, on, and these personal endings are identical to those of the imperfect. The difference being that whereas the imperfect is formed by attaching these endings to the present stem, i.e., for example, lepon for lepo, the second aorist attaches these endings to a shorter stem, in this case, lambda, short iota, pi. So you end up with the second aorist of lepo being elepon, elepes, elepe, elipomen, elipete, elepon. And so to contrast these four stems, the verb stem that gets used in the present, the verb stem that gets used in the imperfect, the verb stem that gets used in the future, and in the second aorist, you see that both the present and the imperfect have the same stem, lape, with the epsilon iota, but then the future shows the intrusion of the sigma because, as Smyth 97 tells us, pi plus sigma equals psi. So you get lapso, but with the same endings as the present. And then the second aorist, elepon, excuse my omission of the accent. Elipon, you get the same endings as the imperfect, but they are put on the weakest form of the stem, the shortest form of the stem, simply lambda, short iota, pi. And I could have included the first aorist of lείπω, elεψα, where you would see that alpha intrude on the same stem as the future, accompanied by the augment. Okay, so this is the way the stems vary in Greek and window into how important learning your principal parts are, because truly they constitute the Waterloo of any Greek student's career. So I promised that we would see, and Pharr presents here, these special second aorists, where looking at the bottom, you see that instead of having the omicron epsilon thematic vowel preceding the endings, you have nothing preceded the endings, but simply the endings themselves. And so you see the new sigma blank men, te, san added to ebe, 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 ebe. And same thing with egno, 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 egno. Edu, 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 edute, edu. You get these endings added directly without the omega or the epsilon, and thus you get ebein, ebes, ebe, ebemen, ebete, ebesan, egnon, egnos, egno, egnomen, egnote, egnosan, edun, edus, edu, edumen, edute, edusan, or simply edun. So again, there's a lot to learn here, so you should really take your time and do your work of repetition drills to learn not only the special second aorists, but the aorists of that we saw earlier of didomi, titemi, and hiemi, because they will go a long way and you'll see them, God, they're so, they come along so often in Greek that you just have to learn them, and better, the sooner the better. So to the core of the issue here, we have the difference between, or the contrast between, the imperfect and the second aorist. Again, just to remake this point, that you have both of the forms are augmented because they represent past tenses, and you have the same personal endings, omicron nu, epsilon sigma, epsilon, omicron men, eta, on. You have the same endings, but the difference between the imperfect and the second aorist is simply in the verb stem to which it is attached. The second aorist showing the simpler and shortest verb stem here in this example of lείπω, just lambda short iota pi, whereas the imperfect will show the same verb stem as the present, here lambda epsilon iota pi. So there's, that's the difference. Not much of a difference, but it just shows how important it is that you recognize your different verb stems. Okay, so that's it for lesson 10 of Pharr's Homeric Greek. We're only 4 lessons away from really starting to read Homer, because most of the verbs in Homer are aorists and imperfects and second aorists and presents. So take the time and to do your repetition drills and learn this material as well as you can, and be prepared to move forward. Okay, good luck. Work hard on your Greek, and I'll see you again soon.